Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. So great to have you back. Just remember, this is a live stream event, so for those out there, please drop some questions in the chat, some positive encouragement. We love all of that. We are a little bit, we're about like 3/4 of the way through our Movers and Shakers month of September. So again, shout out to Parazero and Delta Drone International for sponsoring this month. It's been an incredible ride so far. I mean, last week we had the FAA on here, Patricia Mathis and Dave Krause from Influential Drones as part of Drone Safety Awareness Week. We had Mike DeCassola and Don Bershoff talking about weather and vertiports in a box. And of course, we kicked off the month with Aaron Gabriel and Ed Anatias. And today, wow, we have with us Sean Guerre, and he's from the Energy Drone and Robotics Coalition, or EDRC, and I have to say, I know this is going to sound corny, but I've been a super fan of EDRC from the very beginning when my dear friend Justin Martin, who's an energy attorney, turned me on to you guys, Sean. So welcome to the podcast.
Howdy, Don. So glad to be here and excited to be with you all today and talk to folks about energy and drones and robotics.
I mean, the information you guys push out, when people ask me, where do you get your information or how do I really plug into this community? I tell them to go to the EDRC and your newsletter. And we're going to talk about all that a little bit more, but let's first talk a little bit about you, Sean. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, thanks, Don. So my background is in energy. So that's where I come from. Family's in energy. My dad was ExxonMobil. I was an oil brat, went around the world. And as I got into energy at post-college, really started to kind of merge with new technology. So new and emerging technology and how it impacted the energy space became my focus. So with various media companies over time, we built communities, and Energy Drone Robotics came about 5-6 years ago, and that's when we started really focusing on the uncrewed systems and remote piloted systems. So that's really my background's in energy, emerging technology. This was a beautiful mix of both.
Well, it is. And so tell us about EDRC. You said, what did you just say, 6 years ago that you created it? Wow.
Yeah, 6 years ago we launched.
Okay, I mean, you're huge, right? Like, if I recall correctly, you have over 16 or 17,000 members?
We do. We just crossed 17,000. So 17,000 members in the community on a global basis. And if there's a, look for silver linings through the COVID experience, a lot of our global has grown. We've picked up a lot more people in Africa and the Middle East, Europe, and throughout Asia and Australia. So that's been really neat to be able to pick up and start getting different regulatory schemes, of course, but a lot of the same best practices and tips and same things that we're trying to do around efficiency and energy. So it's been great, and we've really grown very quickly, fortunately, because if you look at pretty much anyone's sector reports, whether it's David Benowitz at Drone Analyst or the folks over at Drone Industry Insights in Europe, energy is pretty much the #1 driver and the #1 spender in drones and robotics. So it's a really vibrant market, and we've been very fortunate to be plugged in and helping that community grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's go back a little bit in time then and explain why it is you actually created this. I know it's kind of a beautiful combination of energy and technology, but why did you create EDRC?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how kind of serendipity occurs. We were in another emerging technology field around 2D moving to 3D on large energy engineering construction projects. And so there was a whole lot of technology involved in that. There was a lot of, how to migrate from 2D to 3D. And during a lot of our meetings, we saw these incredible drone footage, basically, that people had of their construction projects. And so we started asking some questions about that, and more companies were starting to utilize drones in a variety of different ways, not just for photogrammetry on construction projects, but inspections, mapping, surveying. They had tons of questions about hardware, software, services, in-house versus outsource. And so it really quickly became apparent that there was a real need to sort through that information together, and that everybody would be able to move their programs forward more aggressively and still safely by sharing information. And at the same time, we started finding more and more solution providers who had that hardware, software solutions and services, and drone service providers that needed to know, at these very large energy engineering firms in oil and gas and power and utilities and chemicals, well, who's doing the work with the drones? These have tens of thousands of employees, so it was really a way for us to help connect the market and share best practices. So that was really the reason for founding.
Well, and you're doing that. We'll talk here shortly about some of the ways that EDRC is doing that, some of the different platforms you have, and how people can directly plug in. But let's talk substantively a little bit. I'd like to seize on what you said, Sean, about this industry and how it's growing globally. By the way, of course, in the United States, I'm preaching the choir here. You know this, Sean. Infrastructure right now is the coin of the realm. Right, we've got a multi-trillion-dollar bill making its way right now through Congress, hopefully going to pass next week, and maybe some, trickle down into infrastructure, including with drones, with robotics, and the support of drones and robots to infrastructure is really key. I actually just wrote a piece for Inside Unmanned Systems magazine on that right before AUVSI, where I talk about the 16 sectors of infrastructure. Clearly, energy is one of those sectors. And so let's talk a little bit about, with your expertise and experience, Sean, what would you say are the 3 most prevalent or best ways that you're seeing drones in particular plug into the energy sector?
Sure. I mean, if we're talking big picture, Don, I think it's going to be inspection is number one. That's obviously, when you look at the combination of benefits you're going to get from using a uncrewed or remote piloted, whether it's ground or aerial or subsea, you basically have obviously safety, number one, right? You're not having to rig up ropes, you're not having to put people on scaffolding. So you're not having to put people around critical infrastructure that's live, right? High transmission lines, et cetera. So safety is going to check the number one box with inspections as one of the big use cases. And then number 2 is efficiency, because you don't have to take that flare stack down, or you don't have to contaminate a nuclear area because you're able to put a robot in there instead of a human. So you have a variety of different areas that can keep going, which in critical infrastructure could be millions of dollars a day to not have to take those down. So you have safety, you have cost, and then just efficiency. You're getting better data, and you're getting it faster and easier than doing it some of the old ways. So inspection's number one, because it's got 3 big bullets behind it. And then behind that's going to
before you go on, I would love to jump in there for 1 second, because I did a TED talk a long time ago about the Power Threes, and I actually wrote something for Iris Automation. They put out as one of their thought leadership pieces, and I called it the 3 E's. Right? It's economy, efficiency, and effectiveness when you're talking about inspections. So check that out, everybody, on my website under white papers. But agree with you 100%. I mean, that's exactly what my research indicated, and there's some dollars and figures in that article if you really want to check it out. So inspections number 1. What do you say number 2?
Sure. Number 2 is going to be surveying. So in essence, surveying is huge, whether it's a large scale solar array that's being done, or wind farms, onshore, offshore, or if it's additional infrastructure adding onto a refinery. You have a ton of surveying and mapping that's being done. And so I'd say that's the strong number 2. which obviously is held back a little bit based on the US, at least regulatory scheme with
Yeah.
beyond visual line of sight. But it definitely offers, I think, an area that aerial remote piloted makes a lot of sense. And we're seeing a lot of use cases there where they use some combination of satellite and drone. They're definitely in that realm.
Okay. And do you have a number three? So inspection, surveying, mapping, and number three.
Number three, I think that's picking up quickly is what I'd like to call regulatory, which could be an offshoot of inspections, but I put it under regulatory. And the reason is this, one of the big areas, obviously for our oil and gas pipeline, gas utility customers that we have who are asset owners is methane detection and, optical gas imaging. So they're trying to check the boxes for ESG, which is critical for multiple stakeholders now, are looking to see that.
I'm sorry, I'm very sensitive to acronyms, having spent my lifetime in the military. What is ESG?
Sure, that's environmental, societal, and governance are the three big areas that are, in essence, very broad, but they are needed to be utilized in order to have a variety of different things. Financial, in order to get loans, as they're building new infrastructure, pipelines or terminals or what have you, you have to have certain ESG goals have to be passed for financial institutions. So there's several banks that will not write for energy unless they're meeting certain ESG metrics or goals.
Oh, wow.
So
okay,
yeah, so ESG is kind of a powerful, broad subset. And within that, there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can make your operations more efficient. You can make them obviously move from fossil to renewables. So you have a variety of different methods of satisfying ESG goals, one of which is detection and mitigation of methane. So that is a big area that we're starting to see quite a bit of interest. And the obvious answer is remote solutions make more sense than solutions that involve humans, because obviously that's very time intensive.
So, okay, I just got to ask, because I have seen a lot. You guys have like some methane summit. And so, because I don't appreciate how this works, how are drones being used to monitor methane? Is it like specialized sensors?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. So there are specialized sensors that are used for optical gas imaging and remote sensing. And really what we're seeing, Don, is a combination of satellites, which are being used to look big picture for the leaks, and then drones are brought in to get a lot more precise. They're able to say it's, so a specific drilling rig or specific pipeline pump station might be detected at the satellite level, but then you have drones being brought in and they're going to tell you which seal, which valve, the specific piece of equipment that likely is leaking it, and give you a better detection rate as to what rate of methane is actually escaping. And then you can send in your ground crews to repair. So basically
Wow.
it's detect, mitigate, repair.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned beyond visual line of sight and that other aspect of regulation. I want to table that for 1 second, Sean, and pivot for a second to a question that we got on Clubhouse when you were with us last Thursday, which, by the way, everybody, if you missed it, sorry, we don't tape those, but what a spectacular session we had with some of our regulars out there, some of which I got to meet in human form in Las Vegas, which was super fun, including you, Sean. I got to meet you in person too. The question that somebody posed to you that I want to present here is, how do remote pilots plug into this work that you're talking about in the energy sector, because it is such a booming area? I mean, you mentioned inspection, mapping, essentially regulatory compliance. How do people plug in there?
Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a couple different ways, Don, that they would really get involved. One is there's a lot of large scale projects that are done in particularly say inspection that might be done by a utility in order to prepare for wildfire season, or if they're doing maybe some sort of smart grid upgrade, they need a lot of pilots to fly in a very short amount of time. So they're going to be going to one of the larger drone service providers who then has to recruit the pilots or use some sort of pilot network in order to meet the needs of that project. So I would say there's large scale projects that people could get brought in on that would allow them to then get some of the expertise that they need being around critical infrastructure that would help them to build a portfolio. So I would say for the individual pilot, that's one method, is within a pilot network or as an approved pilot who's got certification with one of the drone service providers, larger drone service providers. That's going to be a way that you could get into it. The secondary way really is around people who have expertise in adjacent markets and then are able to pivot over. So for instance, if you are using LiDAR, let's say, and are doing LiDAR enabled flights, well, there's a lot of LiDAR enabled projects in energy, and that's an expensive piece of equipment, of course. So if you know, and then the quality, you know, you say LiDAR flight, well, there's also the quality of it, right? Is the pilot actually know how to fly? And so if you're doing something in an adjacent industry, it's hard to make a jump from something very far away. So like, for instance, if you're in real estate, you know, that's a great area and you can be doing a lot of work there. It's going to be hard to jump to high transmission lines from that, or vegetation management with LiDAR or thermal. But if you're flying something in a similar industry, you might be able to jump over. Construction, good way to jump over. Folks who may be doing some work in public safety, emergency response, they might have ability to jump over because we cross over a lot with emergency response, right? If you think about it, when you have these huge incidents, whether it's wildfires or these tropical storms, we lose a lot of infrastructure. And so the flights have to be done for both groups, right? Public safety and utilities.
That's a great point. You know, I never, and maybe let's table this, Sean, but let's talk about drone responders, and maybe that's why now it's making sense to me why they've plugged into your event. I didn't make the connection. I was like, huh, Charles Werner is everywhere. Why is he at EDRC? Now I know, like, this makes sense to me. So I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I never connected those dots, but it makes an abundant amount of sense of that connection. Yeah.
So that's, I think, the easiest ways for them to get involved. If you're a pilot and you're looking, how do I get involved? Or if you have a smaller drone service company, that's where I think you have the ability to get into the energy and critical infrastructure space.
Well, and I would assume that some of the bigger energy companies, they have their own in-house drone, programs, right? They have their own unmanned aircraft system programs as well. And I assume that if you have the right prerequisite experience, you may be able to get hired directly by one of these companies as an employee versus as like a 1099 contractor. I think that's probably a viable option as well.
Definitely. I mean, there's people that will take different routes. So we have asset owners who have all different types of hybrid, internal, external, but I will definitely say all of those are growing and growing quickly. So I can tell you in our sector survey, which I think is also backed up in David Benowitz's recent survey, finding certified pilots is one of the top 3 challenges to growing these programs that we're experiencing. Wow. So it's a huge issue.
Yeah, so let's talk about challenges, but before we do, I wanted to just say one thing, because you mentioned LiDAR, you mentioned this kind of specialized training, and you know, Delta Drone International is one of the sponsors of the month, and you know, they actually created a training program in Pretoria, South Africa, to train pilots very specifically on this kind of work, including they've got this really interesting, it's called Rocket Mine line of effort, where when you talk about critical infrastructure, you know, mines, they're in there doing everything from, you know, pre-blast to post-blast to security of convoys of the assets and everything. So just again, shout out to Delta Drone International, and they're of course incorporating Para-Zero safety solutions into their drones as they do this global work. They just expanded into Australia. It's just incredible. But let's talk about those three challenges. So you just mentioned one of the challenges you're seeing in the sector is the availability of qualified pilots. So do you have, like, are you seeing any like solution to that other than what I just mentioned, groups like Delta Drone International that are putting out specified training for this?
Yes. So briefly back to the Delta drone, what you just mentioned. By the way, that is one of the most difficult areas to get pilots is in mining because of the GPS denied environment. So we have quite a few mining asset owners in the community, and I will say it's one of the toughest places to actually be able to operate a drone because a lot of the skills that you're able to use in blue sky don't work in that GPS denied environment. So anyways, to flip to the challenge, yeah, basically what they're doing is spinning up either with external partners, like what you're talking about, the drone, with other training organizations, or internally, they're creating levels of training. So it used to be, okay, we've got to get this transmission line repair person through their 107, and that was it.
Right.
And
Right.
now we're seeing, just like some of the larger drone service providers, they're stratifying their training. So they're building pretty detailed training programs that you have to have a certain amount of hours flying certain types of flights and have a certain amount of training in order to be able to fly the larger, because we're starting to see a lot of bigger, heavier drones that have bigger payloads that are more expensive, and around certain type of infrastructure that may be a little bit more challenging, like high transmission, et cetera. So we're starting to see some real reach out to building, either internally or with an external partner, larger training programs so that their in-house teams and or the service providers who fly on their behalf are equally trained and certified, and then keeping up with that so that they can continue to expand their programs. So that's what we're seeing on the training.
Okay, well that's like we'll call it challenge or opportunity to improve, number one. What other challenges and opportunities to improve are you seeing, like maybe the next two and three?
Sure. So number two would have to be regulatory. They are like I think most sectors, energy is held back until regulatory catches up, whether it's BVLOS, which we'll talk about, or other parts of the regulatory scheme where I was mentioning earlier around methane, and there were certainly methane supposed to be monitored and detected at different levels, but they don't, not all state and local regulatory bodies accept drone data for that purpose. And so it's getting the regulatory bodies to agree, whether that's nuclear, or something in that area, that you can use a drone to do the inspection and the data is equivalent or better to the methodology that's already been approved by that regulatory body. So kind of arcane, but it's important.
No, you know what? I thought you were going to go to BVLOS and where we are with that, but you know what, Sean? You're exactly right. I did a piece on unmanned or uncrewed underwater vehicles, gosh, a year and a half ago for Inside Unmanned, where I very specifically looked and of course, most of the work there, as you mentioned, is for these underwater pipelines and that kind of communications infrastructure. And, a lot in the energy, obviously in the energy sector as well. And you're absolutely right. There's a lack of kind of consensus on the inspections of those underwater assets in particular, as to using robots or underwater vehicles and certifying them, not just out in the open sea, of course, like beyond their territorial waters, but even internally to the United States, and like, in lakes or other things that might also have some of these assets. really weird, like Army Corps of Engineers, like has jurisdiction over certain things. And then the U.S. Coast Guard has, it makes your head hurt. But absolutely, I think this is an area that really needs regulatory consensus and standards, because it is going to hurt us in the long run, not just in the air, but underground and probably ground as well. Um, so, okay, let's talk BV loss though, because you and I talk about this all the time. I remember my Holy Grail article. You guys seized on that and pushed that out, everybody. It went really huge, largely because of you, Sean, and your team. Let's talk about BV loss and how the lack of, other than waivers, right, exceptions to policy, how the lack of those regular and scalable and repeatable operations remain a challenge for the energy sector.
Sure. So it's definitely a big area, Don. As you know, we're excited about the fact, that at our summit, which we'll talk about later, you're going to be moderating one of our panels, one of our kickoff panels, actually, in the keynotes around BV loss. So that's the level of importance this has within our community. We're certainly growing our programs quite a bit with blue sky or internal, inspections and survey mapping. But BV loss represents probably the greatest jump that you would see in the ability to inspect, in particular, large linear infrastructure. So transmission lines, obviously, for utilities, pipelines for oil and gas, and the ability to go from ship to shore or offshore. And so BV loss represents a huge area of potential gain that obviously checks those same boxes we talked about earlier, right? Safety, so you're not having to send a helicopter with a person, attached to it, or a crew. You're able to obviously gain efficiencies and cost savings. And in some cases, back to that regulatory, you have to fly that infrastructure on a regular basis because you have to look for changes. So God bless you, that are happening on a variety of different spots. So the ability, as you say, to be able to do that regularly within the timeline that's needed for a regulatory body or for your asset managers who have a certain amount of inspection they need done on a regular basis, and to have that repeatable would just be, like I say, an ability well beyond where we are today. So there's just so many use cases in most markets, but energy for sure. So we're excited about that. There is obviously a BV loss committee now that's doing work with the FAA. We're excited that the FAA came out, as you mentioned recently, on not only your podcast and other areas, has said they believe we're going to have something out, before the end of the year, for at least starting that whole very long process of public comment and all the ways that laws actually finally get made, or regulations finally get approved. But at least we're at the front end of it. So It's been a while coming, but at the same time, I think we could see the end of the tunnel coming in the next couple of years, and that's exciting. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, last week it was FAA Administrator Dixon said on Instagram Live that I had the privilege of being on with him that he expected the BV loss ARC to provide their recommendations by the end of November. So gotta love, the holiday reading. Yay, Thanksgiving, eat your turkey, read the recommendations. But, when it comes to the rulemaking, I mean, those recommendations will obviously inform that. My thinking is that that'll be a little ways off, but really exciting stuff. I totally agree, Sean, that the BV loss and what that's going to look like here. Clearly, they're moving out in Canada. We had Glenn Lynch from Volatus Aerospace on a Legacy podcast talking about some of the things they're doing there, and Australia as well, doing a ton of R&D. And oh, by the way, everybody, if you're not tracking, Europe right now, as we speak, is in Gulf of Finland 2.0 trials for unmanned traffic management. They're doing all kinds of stuff, and they're doing some of it BV loss. And so really cool stuff happening globally on that. So that's 1 and 2. I want to get to the third challenge and then pivot to talk about this conference and some of the things you have going on, Sean, so we can tell people how they can really plug in and keep informed in all of these efforts that EDRC and you have going on. So what would you say is number 3 challenge? We had the pilot shortage, if you will, qualified pilots. Number 2, regulatory on a number of levels. And what would be number 3?
Number 3 is going to be I think, strong around building out their software and hardware in a sustainable fleet model. And there's been so many changes that have occurred, either based off of the belief or the position of various government and or commercial entities about what types of drones or manufacturer of drones or things like that are or are not acceptable around critical infrastructure. So there's a lot of questions there that have changed what was probably one of the more dominant trends on how they were building out their platforms. Also, as they've started getting into these more specific projects and use cases, they need heavier drones, more durable, heavy lift, that can handle bigger payloads and fly for longer endurance. So now you're looking at different fuel sources, you're looking at some of this very customized. So how do you build out a fleet that you can then manage over a period of time and maintain, and then attaching that hardware back to software that is allowing that data to be maneuvered into the company in a very safe way and into the company's data workflows. So I would say it's a combination of hardware, software, data management. So I'm kind of tripling up on the third one, but basically it's that tech stack, hardware, software, tech stack, and the tremendous amount of data it creates, and how to safely, as I mentioned, handle that within a workflow that plugs into some of their existing legacy software that they utilize to run their companies and their assets. That's a third big challenge, is getting that all together and working in an efficient manner without having to change it out every few months.
Yeah, so Sean, you're preaching to the choir here, because that's exactly why the military is going to what they're calling the MOSA, the Modular Open Systems Approach, for software, this idea of we need to plug and play, and as things get updated, we can't replace an entire system or, have a whole new software, solution. And so I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of this. Look, I think everybody knows I've got that, military background, and a lot of people don't appreciate that connection between the commercial sector and the military sector and the symbiosis of it. What you're going to see on that military side is going to roll over onto the civilian side. And Sean, it's going to make a difference in what you just talked about, this idea that we need to upgrade legacy programs, and we need to plug in these new, not only hardware, pieces of hardware through that software, but all of that. So absolutely. Let's talk about your event that's upcoming, because we have maybe, about 10-15 minutes left, and you have so much going on. I really want to make sure people know how they can kind of continue this conversation after this podcast is over and plug into the incredible stuff that you guys are pushing out at EDRC. So let's talk about your October event. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, happy to. So basically, October 25th through the 27th will be our 5th annual summit in Houston, Texas. And what we do there is bring together the asset owners from all the different areas in energy with their uncrewed remote piloted teams, whether it's drones or robotics, as well as the service providers who are doing drone service or robotic service for them on their behalf. And then lastly, of course, and very important, are the solution and technology providers who bring that hardware, software to the mix that is very specific, that can be utilized for the energy sector. So all three are involved. We have a full expo that goes on that has about 75 companies who are showcasing those solutions. We have a drone zone where people are flying. We have robot row where people are crawling. So we've got all kinds of different things going on that happen on that show floor. And then up in the conference, we cover a lot of areas. That's where we really have expanded quite a bit. So we're covering industrial drone delivery and unmanned cargo. We're covering methane detection and mitigation. We are covering renewables, so how drones and robots are being used in and around the renewable industry for wind and solar. And then, of course, we have the combo event that we're doing with drone responders on emergency response and disaster planning with UAVs. So we've got quite a bit going on over the 3 days, kind of packed in order to get everything in. And we're super excited about bringing the industry together and having a quality group who could be in Houston coming up in October.
Yeah, so again, the foot stomp, this is going to be a live event. It's going to be in Houston, Texas. I believe it kicks off Monday, October 24th, if I have that date right, Sean. Goes for most of that week. Yeah, yeah.
The 25th. Mm-hmm.
The 25th. Got you. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm traveling on the 24th. That's why my brain went there. I'm not looking at notes right now.
Sure.
Really excited to be a part of that. I know last year, Sean, like so many other conferences, you went online. I still think that was, I had the privilege of being one of your keynote speakers about the regulatory arena, and what an honor that was. So thanks for that opportunity. You had a Bots and Brews happy hour online, which was hilarious, by the way. Are you going to do something like that live? Because I'm hoping you say yes, and when I'm there.
Yeah, we are. We've got our opening reception is Bots and Brews. And I can't promise, like we did virtually, having Steve Wozniak do the welcome, but we'll have somebody pretty special. And then on night number 2, just based on being this time of year when we're holding the event this year, we're doing Oktoberfest. So night 2 reception is Oktoberfest. So we're gonna have a good time both nights for sure.
All right, well, I'm into it. I'm down. I can't wait. So let's talk about your newsletter. You've got a new, I guess I'll call her an editor. Is it Megan Horn?
Megan.
Am I saying that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's just, again, this is just from memory because, like I said, I am a super fan. I'm a consumer. Megan is hilarious. She comes up with these quippy titles and just makes me want to read things. So tell us about your newsletter, how people can sign up.
Sure. Everything we're talking about, Don, you can easily get to if you go to our main website, which is edrcoalition.com. So if you go to edrcoalition.com, you're going to see an easy way to see news, and you can either look at the news and or sign up for the newsletter. You can see under events, all the events we have going on, both digital and live, including the summit that we were just talking about. And you're able to take a look and see who's exhibiting, what are the sessions, so like your session on BV loss, or the regulatory sessions, or the use case sessions, which we have a ton of, where various utilities are talking about the projects they've been working on over the last year. Or you can go to our resources section, where we have our directories and or all of our past. So for instance, you talked about our digital that you were part of when you did the regulatory roundup. That entire series of sessions was recorded and is in our resources section. So when people go to edrcoalition.com, they can get access to any of those items. But specifically on the newsletter, that's one of the things we changed about a year ago, as we were definitely starting to have a lot more digital channels and outreach. We looked at the landscape, and there are a lot of quality news sources that are out there that go out sometimes on a daily basis, like DroneLife, who does a great job getting stories out.
Absolutely. I mean, we love DroneLife. We appreciate them hosting us and having us on their website. Absolutely. I've been, a super fan of Miriam McNabb and everything DroneLife does, like also from the beginning, and obviously a regular contributor in writing and now with this podcast. So totally agree. Thanks for that shout out for Miriam.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great source, and we're readers here at Energy Drone Robotics Coalition. But the one item that wasn't out there was something focused just on, obviously, the energy industrial. So how do you curate out of all the massive amount of news on drone and robotics, what's going on, and put together around technology, projects, use cases, and the regulatory that would affect or impact our market, and put all that together and do it in a way that's slightly irreverent, and makes it a little bit more fun to read. These are serious topics, so we certainly don't take too much of a license on it, but that's where our team, particularly Megan as our editor, makes sure that we put things that make it very readable, like you say, super easy to digest, and it gives you top of mind what's been happening over the last couple of weeks in drones and robotics and AI in the energy space. So that's really where our niche fits, and we've really seen some nice increase in the readership over the last few months.
Well, I'll tell you, Sean, you know, I think you and talking about DroneLife, I think it's a perfect example of this industry and how everyone has kind of their niche, and there's room for everybody, and if we elevate each other, how we can propel this entire industry. And I know that is a goal for many of us. I know it is for you, Sean, and particularly in the energy sector, and obviously for me across a whole bunch of different verticals, including advanced air mobility. I have a big heart for that. You know, so thanks for what you do. I mean, you guys have Think Tank Thursdays and put out a lot of free things. Let's talk about your upcoming report, because we have a couple minutes left, and then I want to talk a little bit about what we can expect kind of next for the podcast and in the future. I know you have a report coming out. You do one almost annually, semi-annually. I know last year you took a little bit of a breather because of COVID, and it probably would have been a little skewed. So tell us about the report, what it is, when we can expect it, and how we can find it.
Sure, absolutely. So this is going to be one of our benchmark surveys. So with the benchmark survey, we take a look at what type of hardware is being flown, software that's being utilized, what type of payloads, projects, how many pilots are in the different energy companies, programs, how many are internal versus external, where they see the growth over the next 12 to 24 months as far as their types of projects that they're going to be utilizing. So it's quite a bit of areas that we cover that really help understand where we are in a place in time. Last time we did it was the 2019. So by skipping 2020, we're interested to see kind of where the growth is. That'll be done throughout the fourth quarter and will be released first quarter of 22. And when we release it, it's no charge. People are able to pick it up at EDRcoalition.com when it comes out in the first quarter.
Well, awesome. And I really look forward to reading that. I mean, I think the first quarter 2022, between the BVLOS ARC and maybe some of the things we may see there, of course, you got CES 2022, and they're going to go live in Vegas. Super excited for that. Part of Women in Drones, and we're going to have our Women to Watch Award there. That is like just kicking it up 50 million notches. So excited. Can't wait till January. So many things happening. We've got to just like maybe a minute left, Sean. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds of that to give us your kind of 30-second elevator speech wrap up, and then we'll just talk real quick about what people can expect going forward.
Sure. So one of the things that we always like to get across is while we focus on one sector, we love working with everyone in the industry. So if there's one thing I like to get across it's that we have a big tent theory. So whether it's women in drones, whether it's different media sources, whether it's different groups of any kind around STEM and helping grow the next generation who's going to be interested in actually handling and running our drone and robotic programs or managing the AI on the data, we're interested in working with all of these groups. So anyone who has an interest, please visit our site. There's easy ways to contact various people, including myself. Reach out and we'll help you get plugged in. So that's a really important thing that I'd love to get across. And we love working with everyone and appreciate opportunities like this to let people know that the energy market is continuing to grow safely, efficiently, and very rapidly. And we're looking forward to onward and upward for the next few years.
No, that's great. I know that like there's so many Navy or maritime focused phrases that are always relevant, like the tide raises all ships. I'll just spitball here. The airstream raises all aircraft. I mean, we do this together, right? So thank you for everything you do, Sean. Thanks for being here with us today and sponsoring this particular episode. Thanks to Delta Drone Para Zero for for lifting us this month as well. And for those that are going to dial in tomorrow on Clubhouse, 11 a.m. Mountain, 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have Tanner Harris from Blue Nose Aerial. He's in critical infrastructure, but he's got a really interesting drone franchise model. I call him the Starbucks of drones. He's the only one. He's the only one in the game doing this right now. So we're going to talk about that in Clubhouse, and he's going to be our last mover and shaker next week. So looking forward to having Tanner on there. Thanks again, Sean. Thanks to everybody for dialing in. Really appreciate all of you. And that's all she wrote. Have a great rest of your week out here.
Thank you, Don.